And Brian Thacker, on my extreme right, is a real torturer. He dragged his father around the world to all sorts of countries where there were no family roots to be found, I don't think, and comes up smiling despite the difficulties encountered along the way. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our panellists. He is another of the world's intrepid travellers and says he's visited 77 countries, or 78 if you include Tasmania. He recounts his various and hilarious adventures in his books Rule Number 5, No Sex on the Bus, Planes, Trains and Elephants, The Naked Man Festival, I'm Not Eating Any of That Foreign Muck, and Where's Wallace? He's gone in search of as many silly, outlandish and even staggeringly banal festivals as time, distance and severe bouts of exposure will allow. He reveals how, as a tour leader around Europe, he fed a busload of tourists horse meat spaghetti bolognese.
It was a lot cheaper than buying the beef.
And did you have
and
to
the
kill
passengers didn't know.
yourself?
I told them they were feeding them beef. They didn't know.
They didn't know. They didn't know what. And left a lone passenger stranded by the side of a motorway in France for 3 hours in nothing but his underwear, clutching only a purple toothbrush. He searched for and travelled on the most unusual modes of transport, from stubborn mule to bumpy hovercraft to ancient plane, to satisfy his readers' desire for vicarious thrills. And in his latest book, Sleeping Around, he shamelessly freeloads his way around the world, catching free food and accommodation wherever and however he can as a couch surfer par excellence. But the book that we're going to talk about today, the one called I'm Not Eating Any of That Foreign Muck, in this book he drags his 73-year-old father halfway across the planet to such far-flung and exotic locations as Gibraltar, Sri Lanka, Malta and Singapore in an attempt to retrace his dad's history. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Brian Thacker.
Thank you. My dad, Harry, he has 2 fingers missing on his right hand, and that happened because he nibbled it off when he was chewing his nails. I believed that until I was 7, until I finally figured out that you can't chew off your own fingers. And then I found out the truth. He got his fingers caught in a machine gun in the Second World War. There was one small problem with that tale: he actually hasn't been in any war. But after the war, he did join the British Royal Navy, and he worked as a cook in a submarine, and that was how he really lost his fingers. He was cutting up carrots one day and missed. And so for quite a few years, after cutting up vegetables with the utmost of care, I did eventually find out the truth. He lost his fingers at a BSA motorcycle factory in Birmingham. But that's what I thought for about 20 years. Then one day he was around for dinner, and I was cutting up some carrots, and I thought about it, and I said, Dad, how old were you when you lost your fingers at the BSA motorcycle factory? And he said, it wasn't the BSA motorcycle factory, it was a plastic moulding factory in Manchester. And what dawned on me at that time was I really did know nothing about my dad's life. I knew some small things. I knew, of course, he was born in England. His mum died when he was young and he was put into a home. He joined the Navy, married my mum, and popped out a few kids and immigrated to Australia, but I didn't really know much more. So it was then they had an idea that I could take my dad on a physical and emotional journey through his life, so get to not only know my dad better, but get to know us better. And so I took him to the, well, first of all, put the idea to my dad, and he did honestly say, which became the title of the book, he said, yes, I will come, but as long as I don't have to eat any of that foreign muck. So, yeah, so I took him to the pub and got an abridged version of his life to figure out our itinerary. And then that afternoon I found out more than I did in 40 years. I found out that he actually, there was 8 children. They didn't all go to the home. They were split up everywhere. The war was on. They had to dodge bombing raids to go to school. He escaped from the home to join the Navy. I thought he'd been stationed in Malta, but he'd also been stationed in Gibraltar and Sri Lanka and Singapore. And so our little trip turned into a big world tour. So I took my dad on a 10-week trip around the world, pretty much. And the most time we'd ever spent together was about 2 hours. So we had 10 weeks together with my dad. And he is great. He was great fodder for a book because he really is a funny man. And his mother died and he was losing his fingers and everything else. Everything is based about humour. You can't take anything seriously. And I mean, sadly, that thing is that we also have had 50 years or 40 years of the same jokes, and I mean the same jokes. I don't know how many times I can count on my dad's fingers that we drove past a cemetery and he said, "That's the dead centre of the city. People are dying to get into there, and you need a skeleton key to get into there." That many times. Well, how many times when I was a little kid and he said to me, "Brian, you've got two brains, one's lost and the other one's looking for it." But just quickly, it wasn't just my dad who made great fodder. There was also my other relatives I soon discovered. I stayed with my Auntie June, whose the whole time we stayed with her was in an apron. And when she wasn't cooking roast dinners, and I'm talking roast dinners for lunch and dinner, she was vacuuming, which was actually quite difficult because the entire house was like a menagerie of little, what do you call them, porcelain animals. And like had to tippy-toe through the lounge room just to get to the lounge so you didn't stand on a duck or a horse. And there was my auntie Maggie, who had an obsessively coordinated bathroom. It was white with purple trim. And fair enough, there was purple towels and purple curtains and purple shower curtains, but there was also purple face cloths, purple soap and shampoo. She didn't buy this shampoo because she liked the brand, she bought it because it was purple. There was also purple toilet paper and purple fresheners in the toilet. And there was my Auntie Diane, who when we went to visit, my dad hadn't seen her for about at least 10 years, and she put on quite a bit of weight. And so the first time we saw her, she had a red coat on. I have to read this. And my dad, the first thing he said to her, this is my dad, he said, "Don't stand by the bus stop or 16 people will jump on you. They'll think you're on the Red Midlands bus." And so it was my dad. Even had my Aunt Gladys, his sister, was in a wheelchair, and he called her rigor mortis, which everyone, including her, thought was hysterical. What made it even easier to get great fodder from my dad was to put him out of his comfort zone. As I said, he doesn't eat any foreign muck, but I managed to get him to an Indian restaurant. There's a place called the Curry Mile in Manchester. It's 1 mile of Indian restaurants, and there's all neon signs. I dubbed it Vindaloo Vegas. But I managed to get my dad there because only recently before we arrived, the House of Commons, this is a true story in England, officially proclaimed chicken tikka masala as Britain's new national dish, apparently, so it is. So I got my dad to the Indian restaurant. I was just going to read a very brief piece when I got my dad there. As soon as we sat down, an Indian waiter approached us and said in a thick Mancunian accent, "Hey up, would you like a beer to start?" And said to Dad, "Would you like a Kingfisher beer?" I said to Dad, "It's from India." And he said, my dad, who's still got his accent, "As long as he's not made from water from the Ganges." Dad was looking around the restaurant and at the other diners as if he'd landed on another planet. Even the Indian music playing in the background was too much for Dad. "You'd think they put some bloody decent music on," he grumbled. As plates of food, including Britain's new national dish, plus some Rogan Josh, rice and naan bread, were being set on the table, Dad screwed up his face and said, "Looks like the dog's eaten something that's upset it." There was only a few mouthfuls of food left on Dad's plate as he wiped his mouth clean and announced, "That was the best Indian meal I've ever had." It wasn't quite an Indian meal though. He'd ordered the omelette and chips. Also, great travelling. My dad, I got to see him in different lights, things I'd never seen him do before. One of the things that happened on the trip was the first time I'd ever seen my dad drunk. He really rarely drinks. And we were staying in Butland's holiday camp. I don't know if you're at Butland's holiday camp. There used to be about 20 or 30 of them in the 60s. We went in when we were a kid. And we went back to Butland's in Minehead. And first of all, I thought no one would go. Why would you go to Butland's holiday camps when you can fly to Spain for 10 quid? But I think it had, how many beds was it? Like 5,000 beds, and the place was full. And it was during the Euro football championships, and we went to the big mock Tudor English pub for England-France game. And so the game had just finished, England lost as usual, and my dad said, "Bloody England, I'm going to bed." I was with two other gentlemen who were trying to get us drunk, and I stayed with Bob, who was having a whole heap of trouble standing up, and Pete, who tried to drink my way, and Pete and I tried to drink my way through my now rather impressive collection of full pints because they kept buying me drinks and I couldn't keep up. After a couple of hours or so, an old fellow dressed in an England top and wrapped in streamers waltzed in with two tall blonde girls wearing incredibly short skirts draped around him. It was Dad. He'd attempted to go back to our unit but couldn't get anywhere near it because an all-in brawl was taking place right outside the door. By the way, what is it about English that when they lose a game of football they have to beat the hell out of each other? While he was waiting for the fight to finish, he met two young couples from Manchester and they invited him back to his apartment for a few drinks. One of the girls' boyfriends had swapped shirts with Dad, So he was now wearing Dad's fetching stripy number from Target. Dad was grinning like a Cheshire cat, and it wasn't just because he had two-legged girls all over him. He was drunk. I've never in my life seen my father drunk. In fact, I can't even remember seeing him drink at all when I was a kid. He has a beer or two now, but never gets beyond that slightly silly stage. It's also hard to tell how the grog's affecting him because he's slightly silly most of the time anyway. We came here in 1946, Dad told the girls as we staggered out of the nightclub. Dad was like a little kid, and I mean, he was really like a little kid. He squeezed into a Postman Pat kiddie ride and put some money in. The rest of us jumped on the roof of Post Pat's van, and we all sang along to Postman Pat, and his black and white cat. When Dad jumped on the life-sized horsey ride and started belting out the theme from Rawhide, I suggested it might be time for bed. So yes, my dad was wonderful fodder for the book, and I feel very privileged to do that trip because so many people, their dads pass away or whatever, and they say I didn't get to know my dad, but I got to spend all that time with my dad. And it's funny, before we left, we basically just talked about football, soccer, and not much else. When we got back, we talked about the trip, and now we just back to talking about football again, but we have this shared bond. And he still says the same jokes, and he still jokes about his little fingers. There's two. First of all, just first one, just at Christmas, they have the Christmas crackers, and someone next to him had got some little end of the finger that had a little nail on it, and the whole day during lunch he'd put up his hands and say, "Look, I've had a transplant." But my favourite one, when we were in Warwick Castle, we still use those fingers as jokes. We're in Warwick Castle, in the beautiful gardens of Warwick Castle, and there's a group of 10-year-old schoolboys who were feeding a peacock, and he jumped in front of him and said, "Don't do that, look what it did to me." Thank you.
Thank you.